Yo, what is up, people? It is your host, Aphelion, and welcome back to the Ephemeris podcast. It is nice to be back, and I feel like I'm getting my mojo back after 2 weeks of no podcast. So things are feeling good. Things are feeling good. So, just to get right into things, we are once again going to be reaching to the edges of history for cosmological theories, as I've explained in the last episode. And today we're going to cover Babylonian astronomy. So, Babylonian astronomy dates fairly close to the ancient Indian civilization, and I think if I hadn't looked a little deeper into this, I probably would have skipped very, very far forward into history. So I'm kind of glad that we're covering Babylonian astronomy before we get into, ancient Greeks and Anaxagoras and all these people that created, crazy theories. So, yeah, once again, we're covering Babylonian astronomy. What's important about this is the fact that it'll set us up for a lot of good things, like namely the strides made in Persian astronomy, how it influences Greek cosmology, and all of those sorts of things. So, yeah, the main topics of discussion today is going to be very similar to what we did last episode, where it's like, what ideas about outer space came out of this time period, what was accurate, what wasn't, and what can we take away. So kind of that's going to be the gist of the episode. So to begin with, ancient Babylonia is one of the earliest civilizations to figure out the periodic nature of astronomical phenomena, which face value as we see it in the 21st century doesn't seem too surprising because we can, we have the luxury of sitting in our homes in suburbia and watching the sun go up, go down, and then watch the moon go up and go down and be like, oh, well, it looks like that's pretty cyclic. Seems like the moon has its phases and all that, We have the luxury of doing that now, but back in the 17th century, earlier, or even earlier than that, humans had only figured out where they wanted to live, right? They were mostly roaming. And then Mesopotamia came along, which was one of the first settlements or civilizations. That's kind of the area that Babylonia is in. So, yeah, basically, just as they settled, they were figuring out the periodic nature of astronomical phenomena. So, we really got to give them props for it, as they're pretty quick onto it. And, you can also make the case that there are a lot of fun stories as old as time about the reason we have day and night. But it does look like they were the first to take a more logical approach. So yeah, once again, gotta give them props for it. And yeah, before we get any further, I do want to mention that the documentation by Babylonians was wonderful. It was very wonderful. It's very fragmented as we know it now. But what we do know is that the fact that they use cuneiform and tablets and all of that, they had a pretty sophisticated system of documentation, and they had some amazing records. Let's talk about it. In the many records that they created, they documented the changes in daylight. They had ephemerides. Okay, very funny because ephemerides, right? Of when stars and planets set and rose. And then they also, in fact, catalog stars in what is known as the Molopin. And I hope I'm saying that right, because it has some it has a bit of a funky translation from cuneiform, right? And then, on top of that, they had a functional theory of planets. They could measure a synodic month and the length of a year very accurately with what they called the Kidinu, right? So that's a lot. We should step back because it looks like the list of things that these guys accomplish is starting to come together. Like, you start off with periodic nature of the astronomy. Oh, whoa, crazy. Not so surprising now. But, I mean, when you look at the things that they've done with cataloging and recording, then it starts to become real. Like, they had a lot figured out at that time. And that was very, very early on. Right, very similar to ancient Indian civilization. Like, I feel like when you look at ancient Indian civilization, you see, oh, their cosmological theories are pretty strong. They had some, and their distance measurements and all that were pretty good. And then you look at Babylonian civilization and you see, dang, okay, they had full-on catalogs, right? So yeah, let's actually get more specific about the astronomical records because it does get much more interesting than that. So the Molopin, as I said, It gives the name, rise date, set date, and culmination of 66 stars, which is pretty good start. Like, you can imagine this as a skeleton of the map of the night sky. It was like star maps in the making as early as the 13th and 14th century, right? So that's a great start for astronomy, you know? It had many asterisms, sorry. Right, like, as we define it today, they would be like groups of stars that are not traditionally constellations, but basically for them back then it was their form of constellations, right? They had categorizations for it, like some of them were close to the moon, others were a part of this group now called the Zikpu stars, Ziqpu, just to be clear. And the Malapin contained the motion of planets in the lunar path. They recorded the change in visibilities of planets as well, and it was nuts, to be frank. And that's what I mean by their documentation was great. They had all of this down. And lastly, as a cherry on top, just to add in a little bit of cosmological spice, they asserted that the sun and the earth travel the same path as the moon in the Malapin. And it's a little bit of a stretch to make this idea work today, like, because of how, well-established our cosmological scales are today. You could say, well, if you zoom out far enough in that cosmological scale, you could see this idea to be true. The sun, the moon, and the earth, while some of them orbit the others, they follow each other in the direction of this expansion of the universe. But again, let's be honest, that's very much a stretch. I don't think Babylonians had any idea of cosmological timescales as we know them today, and that probably wasn't their thought process. So yeah, I just wanted to try and connect two and two, but let's be honest, that's probably not how things worked. But we're not finished at the Malapin, because they had a lot more. Let's talk about the Venus tablet of Asamduka. Hopefully I'm saying that right. Again, I apologize. It's not my Persian is not my language, or any root languages that come from that. So I might not be very well. I might not be very good at these pronunciations. So basically, this Venus tablet is what I'm gonna call it, right? It had more planetary theory stuff, and you guessed it, it has everything to do with Venus. And just a little side note: if we call it Venus today, I wonder what they would have called it back then. But I don't know. I digress. So what's special about this tablet is it has years of observations of Venus from centuries ago, which is quite intriguing. It wasn't the most accurate. Like, we kind of dispute the accuracy of it today, and like precisely how long these observations were done. I think some estimates are about 13 years of observations, some say 21, but we're not quite sure about these tablets, and we're not quite sure how accurate they were. But it's pretty cool, right? We gotta put a tally on the board for their efforts, and sometimes it really is the thought that counts, I guess, right? And just when you thought it was over, they didn't just do Venus. Most recently translated tablets showed that Babylonians were also looking at Jupiter, and they had 60 days of its path graphed and listed. Like, imagine a velocity over time kind of graph. They had that kind of graph. So, I mean, again, as we progress through this episode, we're seeing a lot of things that the Babylonians did that are like, okay, wow. I don't know how you grasped it so quick. That's a pretty intelligent civilization right there. All right. Anyways, so that is all of the astronomical record and data keeping and all of that stuff. Let's talk a little bit more about cosmology. So if we forget about the fact that cosmology wasn't very well distinguished from the rest of the astronomical stuff Babylonians did, we discovered that Babylonians did not actually adopt a geometric model of the universe, which is interesting. I think the most conventional way you learn about the progression of understanding of the universe is that, first humans thought that the Earth was at the center of the universe, and then it was the sun, and then we created all these crazy theories about the Big Bang, right? But in reality, a lot of the civilizations, or at least the two that we've researched, that came before ancient Greeks who created the geocentric model, they didn't believe in it, which is interesting. Yeah, I mean, for me personally, it makes the ancient Greeks just look like idiots because obviously I can sit here on my chair and laugh about the fact that they thought the Earth was at the center of the universe when I wouldn't do anything innovative like that. And I just think it's fun to be like, haha, you thought the Earth was at the center of the universe. But yeah, the fact that they just came along in the millennium before Jesus and created this idea that Earth was at the center of the universe when no one else did, I like to chuckle at it. Anyways, we'll get a lot into the geocentric and heliocentric models later this season, but for right now, we're gonna leave that a little bit to the side. I may give it a mention a couple of times because it's gonna be a reoccurring theme in this season. So yeah, basically what you need to take away is that based on the ancient civilizations we have seen so far, it looks like geocentric models were just a completely ancient Greek and Western thing. So, additionally, Babylonians thought that the cosmos revolved around heaven and Earth was kind of in the balance of both, right? And they also believed in multiple Earths. So I think I think this is how it went. It was like the Sumerians, who were very closely related to Babylonians, they believed in 7 different Earths because it correlated with the 7 generations of gods or something like that. I believe that's how that goes. But yeah, basically Babylonians believed in multiple Earths. And a little add-on, they had a lunar calendar, which I don't know how important that is, but it's a fact. And yeah, they also had this fun little, not really fun little thing because death was involved, but basically they used to accurately predict when the next lunar eclipse would happen. And because they thought that lunar eclipses were a bad omen, they used to substitute the king when the lunar eclipse happened, and then they kill off the substitute king because he just kind of like carried the bad omen that came with the lunar eclipse, and then they put the good king back in. So yeah, just a fun little story. I just wanted to add that on. Little tangent. It's sometimes it's fun to just look purely at the history and some of the mythology, but even though we're focusing on astronomy and cosmology. But yeah, that is honestly about that. Maybe a little bit quick, a little bit of a swift snippet into historical cosmology, but I think it will be an important one. So yeah, a lot of the stuff that came in the later stages of Babylonian civilization became stepping stones for astronomer, which we're going to learn about later in the season. And just to look at everything in retrospect, let's be honest, Babylonian astronomers were quite spotless. There wasn't much that they did wrong. Like, I know I talked about like what might not be accurate about what they did, but the only inaccuracy we saw is maybe, measurements of concerning Venus and all that. So yeah, they weren't too deviant with the theory. They had a good system of measurements, which is even respectable today. Like, they had water clocks and they had their whole calendar going. So, I mean, they were pretty impressive in general. And yeah, that is Babylonian astronomy. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you guys enjoyed, make sure to leave a follow on Spotify if you're listening on Spotify. And a subscribe would be appreciated if you are listening on YouTube. And until the next episode, when we will talk maybe about Anaxagoras or some stuff in the middle, I will see you guys later. Peace.